Okay, we are here with Anita McBride, who is a wonderful longtime Washingtonian. And I have your bio in front of me. It is very impressive. You've
Yeah.
worked for three presidents, chief of staff to Laura Bush.
Mhm.
You run the First Ladies Initiative at American University. You are a board member at the White House Historical Association, and she's also a writer. You've written several books, including Remember the First Ladies.
Mhm.
And you are co-chair of In Pursuit. And I've
Yes.
talked to Colleen, and she's fantastic.
Good, good. I'm glad. I hope you'll do something with us.
Yeah, she's wonderful. And you're wonderful. And I'm appreciative of you taking the time to talk to me today, for how she led to me. And you've always been so wonderful to talk to for other, just to give perspective on the role of first ladies. And so I would love to hear from you a little bit. This is a different kind of conversation because this is
Okay.
about you and not about
That's tough, actually, Kate. I know you're the first person that I think I've agreed to sit and do something like that with. But I've watched your series, and it's really interesting to hear people's kind of thoughts about how people who influence them. So in a way, it's about others too, which is why I'm comfortable talking about it.
That's exactly right. Yeah, it's kind of threading the needle there.
Right.
So tell me a bit about your childhood, where you grew up, and the women in your life who have
Sure.
influenced you.
Well, thank you for asking about that because, as you introduced me, which thank you for the kind introduction, and you referred to me being a Washingtonian, and it's really interesting because I have been here over 40 years now. I came after the Reagan administration, after they won in 81. But I still say, when people ask me where I'm from, I still say I'm from Connecticut, which is where I was born and raised, in the town of Bridgeport, Connecticut, which is an industrial town, a big city in the state, very ethnic, a lot of immigrant communities, one of which I was a part of. I'm Italian American. Don't let the last name McBride fool you. I'm 100% Italian. Both my parents born in Italy, all my grandparents, really all my relatives except me and my sister. My mother was born outside of Naples, my father in Calabria, the very tip of the boot, but they met as adults in Connecticut. And my mother, I didn't know my mother very well because my mother died when I was 3 years old and died of ovarian cancer. And my father never remarried. But in as many multi-generational households at that time, my grandparents lived right next door, my mother's parents, and my sister and I moved in to live with them, and my father lived right next door. So we were still sort of together as a family, but that loss, was very deep. My sister was older. She felt it a lot more than I did. I was 3. I was sort of blissfully ignorant, I think. I know I was, but my grandmother certainly played a pivotal role in my life. And here she was, my grandfather had just retired. They were ready to enjoy their life a little bit. They had been hardworking immigrants. And probably would have liked to have gone back to Italy to visit family because they had never gone back. But here now she's taking care of a 3-year-old and a 9-year-old. And so but I had others around us, my father's sister, so aunts and cousins and other, women who were part of my grandmother's network too, who helped to, make my life full and complete. And the influence I cannot overstate enough, just sort of the influence of that immigrant experience and being in such a strong, Italian household where traditions were kept very close to all of us. That really formed a great bond for my life. But they were very patriotic Americans. I mean, it took them a long time to become citizens, but they did. Were not involved in politics, but they all registered to vote and voted. That was sort of the extent of it. And it was definitely not a path that would have led me to politics. I wanted to be a doctor. I wanted to, but that was my pre-med, my major in
Wow.
college. I grew up around so many elderly people because of my grandmother and her friends, my aunt and her friends. I wanted to go into gerontology. I was a volunteer at the hospital. I was a candy striper. I don't know if you know what that is, but
Oh,
you
yeah.
walk around, okay, with the carts and you give out magazines to people. I mean, I don't know if any of that's allowed anymore. I worked in an elderly home, the Jewish home for the elderly next to my high school. In Fairfield, Connecticut. And, but when I got to college, I've had to realize that too many failed chemistry tests was definitely a sign this was not going to work. So I might have had the interest and the passion and the compassion to want to be a physician, but I did not have really the academic ability to do it. And Kate, I made a total pivot. I just changed and joined a new program at the University of Connecticut, which was a junior year abroad program to Italy. And I felt, well, okay, this is something that at least I had familiarity with the language. And it would be a great adventure. I think I always had the desire to see where my family had come from, my parents, my mother. So I spent a very formative year there, 1979, 1980, came back, was senior in college, was a volunteer on the Reagan campaign. He won, I moved to Washington. And that was sort of the start of how I got here.
What was I love hearing about your grandmother. What was her name?
My grandmother's name was Maria Di Piano. My grandfather, Pasquale, was in the World War I in the Italian army. He immigrated to the United States in 1920. But my grandmother and my grandmother was pregnant with my mother, but it took nearly 8 years for him to have enough money to bring them over. So that was the first time he saw her.
Wow.
And she was a little girl.
Amazing.
It is an amazing story of resilience. I'm one of thousands and thousands that have those kinds of stories of, resilience, strength, courage to come to a real, unknown environment. It's interesting. There's a picture. I don't have many pictures of my mother at all, and none of me with her. Just one right before she died when I turned 3 years old. The family sort of buried a lot of that. Was their way of dealing with it. I mean, I was very conscious of my grandmother's grief throughout the rest of her life. I'm very conscious of it, and but the one picture that I found as I was cleaning out my grandmother's house after she passed away was the elementary school picture of my mother in the school in Bridgeport, Connecticut, where you can tell she was a little out of place because they put them right into school. She didn't know the language. Everybody, all the girls are in pretty little white dresses, and my mother's in black. And I thought, either they didn't know, my grandmother, who really never spoke the English language well for her whole life. My grandfather did. Of course, my father and others did. But, probably that cultural lack of, awareness when they first got here. But my mother graduated high school. So she was the first to be educated. My dad never got beyond the third grade, worked in a factory his whole life and was a musician, as a second job. It was his passion. But my mother graduated high school. She was the star of the family, for my grandparents. She, graduate school. She worked in their store. She did the bookkeeping for them, their little Italian market. She helped them buy their first house, helped them keep the log to pay their mortgage. I found all these, things of how pivotal she was to their being able to adapt to a new country. So I think, her loss was just never something my grandmother never recovered from. My mother's name was Virginia. She did not have a middle name, which was interesting. But
Virginia is a very kind of unusual Italian name.
and yes, it is. And Anita is too. And then my sister's name is Doreen, which is very Irish. We have no
Yeah.
Irish in our family. So I don't know what my mother, I never got the chance to have those conversations. With my mother. So I don't know. But the interesting thing, in the Italian culture, if you're born on a feast day, you should be named for that saint. And so when I was born, July 16th is my birthday. That's the feast in Mount Carmel. And my grandmother wanted my mother, I do know this story, to name me Carmela, of which my husband says, if that was your name, I probably would not have married you. And my mother won that battle, so
I just think of The Sopranos when you say Carmela.
Carmela. Yeah, of course,
I mean,
which is, sort of the stereotype of,
yes.
of Italians.
Yes.
But anyway, that's my early upbringing. But thank you for asking about my mother, because I don't talk about her a lot because I didn't know her.
I honestly, this is kind of like, don't judge a book by its cover, right? Because I'm surprised.
Sure,
at
of
how
course you
emotional
are.
your story is.
Right.
And do you, and I know you have a daughter and a son.
Yes, I do.
How does it change you, having not known your mother, how does it change how you relate to them? I mean, did it make you want to be so present in their lives?
And, and Kate, as you know, my background in my work, it was hard to be present for them at some very formative years, which I really think about, often. And still, even after all these years, and they're adults and they're doing fine, I still think about some of the things that I miss. But we did, the best that we could. We had great help. I had a great supportive husband. The kids, I tried to keep them exposed to as many opportunities as they could. My daughter Giovanna wrote a little children's book about her experiences of visiting the White House. So that made me feel a lot better about that. I think my son had a harder time. I mean, boys, I think, need their moms a little bit more when they're younger. And, but I think, I think often about, I think my kids recognize that they don't have grandparents around, because I talk about having grown up with my grandparents and how important that was. And of course, my mother died, as you know. My father died in 2001, not long after 9/11. He had been living with us, but Giovanna was just a year old. Andrew was just 4. So they don't really, remember him very much. Tim's father died before we were married. I never got to meet him, my husband's father. And his mother, thankfully, we had her for quite some time, and the kids do remember her and the times and the summers that we spent with her in Michigan, which is where she lived. So that was the one Grammy, that they had. So I think about that they didn't have that background like I had.
But they had you.
They had me and they had Tim, and we were a great, team together. And, it's interesting too. I want to give a shout out to a number of my friends here in the area that I've known and worked with a long time. Sometimes there were grandparent days, or there were, special friend days, or, bring your mom to school days. And I couldn't be there because of working or traveling. And I have some dear friends in the area. I think about, my friend Lisa Job, who's like an aunt to the kids, and my friend Diane Terplick, women that I met working in the White House back in the Reagan Bush days, that we are still close. And so they're like family, and they would, be a surrogate for me. Or my friend Kathy Wellington, who I met through fundraising and politics in the mid 80s, who would show up, and she's a mother of 4 boys. So she would show up at this girls' school with Giovanna, and people are like, "What are you doing here?" She said, "Well, I'm the mom for the day." So I feel very grateful for all these, women friends who, we came up through the ranks in politics together, and, met our spouses, married, had kids, and so we're there to help each other.
I love that. Do you think it's gotten easier? I think this generation, you might see this with Giovanna, although she's still pretty young,
Uh,
but they're more willing to say, no, I'm not going to be available this weekend. I can't now I don't know. The White House is totally different, right? That's one place you can't do that.
You know what, Kate? That's such a great question. And I'm glad that you asked that because I think we really felt in those years that we were there working in the Reagan administration, Bush 1, even Bush 43, the concept of really taking time off with your children or extended, periods, it was never our frame of reference. The intensity, there wasn't even, I have to say, I was director of personnel in the White House. White House personnel is one of my jobs at the end of the Reagan administration and the Bush 41 administration. One of the senior women members of the Presidential Personnel Office got pregnant, and she was in a position that was a commissioned officer, meaning you really don't earn leave in that position. Like non-commissioned people earn leave, so they can apply for leave, take leave. And we were like, well, we don't have a policy for a non-commissioned officer to be pregnant and take time off. How do we handle this? I mean, that's really how different it is now. I think people have no trouble taking time off and figuring it out or saying,
you think so?
Saying no. I do.
Yeah.
I do. I think the intensity of the White House is definitely never going to change, but there does seem to be a little bit more of a family friendliness to it, or acceptance.
I think that's a great thing that this generation has done. Were there women in the White House you'd want to give a shout out to? I mean, probably several. Mrs. Bush.
Several. Yes.
To her.
Definitely. I'd like to work back to really the first person who gave me my first job in the White House after the 1984 campaign when Ronald Reagan was reelected. Was Ann Higgins. She has since passed away, but she had been the director and head of correspondence for Richard Nixon, for Gerald Ford, and she came back for the Reagan administration, obviously a political appointee. She was so great with young people, and she had a huge team of young people that she was happy to train and to mentor. So but she didn't have children of her own. So she hired me. I was one of many. My first job in the White House, I'm not sure if you know this, but I sat in the basement of the old executive office building, now the Eisenhower building, reading the mail. And the mail at that time came in big white bags from the Postal Service. Wow. There were no computers. And you're slicing open the envelopes. And I was trained how to read mail by a woman, Ginny Fogelson, who had been hired in the Franklin Delano Roosevelt administration, reading mail. So she was still reading mail, and she was having to train people like me coming in with different administrations. But Ann Higgins, I know, I'm so grateful to her. She gave me that. I was so happy. I had access to the White House. It didn't matter that I had a pink pass, not a blue pass, but I could just show that pass and walk into the White House. And I sat in the basement. It didn't bother me. I was reading the mail and of the President of the United States. And, later, so she gave me that opportunity, and I'm always going to be grateful to her for that. It was a good friend of mine from college who had graduated before me, who was working in the White House. And he's the one that opened that door for me to meet Ann. And, that's it. It just takes one person. And then
when you were reading through the mail, I'm just curious about that job. When you read the letters, and I'm sure the woman that started with FDR must have had amazing stories to tell. I would love to know them, but that's another conversation. Sure. But when you were reading the letters, were you deciding what needed to be responded to, what the president might want to see? I mean,
that's exactly right. You should have been a correspondence analyst. That's exactly what we did. We were trained how to code the mail, different dispositions for different issues. If somebody wrote a hardship case, those would be sent to a different office that would make sure they got in the hands of the right person at HHS or the Social Security Administration or whatever it might be. A veteran that wrote in, it would get to the right place. Threatening mail that went to the Sacred Service. and then we were trained to help put together suggestions, mail that we saw that should go in the suggested pile for the president to review
Oh,
directly,
interesting.
both pro and con. He always saw a balance and got letters every day. I mean, I think this is still a practice. And then the weekend mail that went with him to Camp David would be a larger stack of mail. And then the responses would come back that Monday to another office that would type up his responses, because he would do handwritten letters, and sometimes, and I saw things sometimes, a hardship case. I remember this one hardship case of this elderly woman in West Virginia who wrote in, was very worried that President Reagan was talking too much about cutting Medicare and Social Security, and she wanted him to know her story. That was one we put in the sample. I think that was one where actually it came back where the president wrote a check.
Really?
And that it happened. And he had one thing in the story about President Reagan people don't know. He had a pen pal here in Washington, D.C., a young African-American boy that he had regular correspondence with, and that actually he and Mrs. Reagan went to their house in Southeast or Anacostia or something and had dinner on TV trays in his house with him and his mother. I know this is what I loved about this job was really, and it's the most basic of jobs. And of course I just wasn't going to stay there my entire career like Ginny, but it was your finger on the pulse of how people are feeling, their complaints about you, their thanks to you, people that will never meet a president of the United States or visit Washington or see the White House. So this was a connection, and I loved it.
I had no idea. I mean, that's a book in itself.
It is.
Those are the personal decisions, and you're probably deciding, well, is this going to be too on the nose? Because if someone's writing something critical, if it gets personal, you don't want the president necessarily to see that, but maybe they should.
Well, they should, and they did, and even overseas, people from overseas that would write and were so mad that the president was talking about placing Pershing missiles in Germany. This was part of the containment of the Soviet Union, the evil empire. And people would write and were very, very angry. And, he would see those too. It is. It's important. It's very important. Yeah. And I hope that practice still goes on. I just, thought it was very formative for me. Let's just say that.
And when did your grandmother pass away and your aunt?
Yes, thank you for asking that. So my grandmother passed away in 1986. So at least she knew I had been working at the White House. She never did get to visit me there. My aunt passed away later, also never visited me there, but knew I was working in the White House. And they were all so proud. It didn't matter. I was sitting in a basement reading mail. I was working at the White House. And for them to think to come with no education, no language skills, and in one generation, I'm working at the White House. And I have a vivid memory of my father did come to visit me, though. And this was when I was director of personnel, very end of the Reagan administration. And I'll talk about that woman that gave me that job. But he came to visit me. And so at that time, your name was, if you were director of an office, your name and your title was on the door. And my dad came to see me and he saw it and he just started to cry. And it really, I realized at that moment, wow, what this must be for him. Again, I told you, third grade education, very proud, hardworking, man. And to see that, it was amazing. And the woman who gave me the opportunity to do that job, Claire O'Donnell, who lives here in Washington, D.C. still. I knew her. So she had worked in the presidential personnel office in the Reagan administration and then had been promoted to management and administration. and the longtime director of White House personnel. It had been really a career position.
Yep.
He was retiring, and she felt for the upcoming transition, we're getting ready, we knew President Reagan was going to leave, that it might be better to have someone who knew the political staff well, was a political appointee, to take over the personnel office to help through the transition. That was a bold decision on her part. That man had been in that job almost 35 years. And so I come in really, I love the White House, but I'd been working in different offices of correspondence in management administration, but personnel is a big job. And she took a chance on me and gave me such an opportunity that opened up an incredible path of leadership in other ways, because being in personnel, I got to know everybody I knew all the mail clerks, but I got to know everyone in all the other offices, the political offices in the East Wing, the West Wing, throughout the complex. I spent many nights just even sleeping in my office, having to learn so much about personnel, things I didn't know. But I made it a great personnel office. We had a phenomenal transition in 1988. Taking care of the Reagan people leaving and, helping to bring in the new Bush administration in 1989. Of course, President Bush brought in all of his own people. So it turned over, but I was one of only a handful that was asked to stay. And thanks to Andy Card, actually.
Oh, really?
Who was in the Reagan administration and then was, in the Bush administration as deputy to the chief of staff for Bush 41. And he was the one that, said, Anita has this and we need her to help transition everyone in.
That's so important.
That's how it happened. Yes.
To have that sort of knowledge base, right, that you're passing down.
Yes.
You know, you knew Kathy Osborne, I bet.
Oh, sure. Sure, I knew Kathy. Kathy Osborne, all these, when I know that you're writing a great book about these, women, the assistants that sat outside the Oval Office and that were, they had a diplomatic role to play. To be sort of not a gatekeeper, but they knew everything that was going in and out. They had personal relationship. They took care of the president. They were, a great connection point to the staff. And Kathy was really terrific. Just a nice person. That's what I always remember about her, to everybody at every level.
She has such a great reputation. And then her relationship with Nancy Reagan, I think, was really special too. I mean,
that's important. That's so important to have relationship with the spouse. I knew, saw that myself when I was working for Mrs. Bush.
You really have had such a fascinating career it's incredible. So the sacrifices of those times when you couldn't go to the sports games and all those things is worth it. But I think it's something that's a challenge. Is there, when you were facing challenges, now, were you at the White House on 9/11?
I was, Kate. I was. Yeah.
And what was your role there? You were working in the East Wing at the time?
No, I wasn't there yet. In fact, I had come back in the Bush administration in 2001. As we all know, that election, we didn't know for 5.5, 6 weeks who the president was going to be. So a truncated transition normally was truncated even more. And so people that I knew from back in the Reagan Bush days who were working for Governor Bush in Texas, this woman, Vickers Meadows, another woman who had a pivotal role in my life. She was director of administration for Governor Bush in Texas. I had known her when she worked in Vice President Bush's office when I was in President Reagan's office. And so she called me and she just said, we're going to need to be ready for having a personnel operation ready to go if this, goes in Governor Bush's direction. Could you help us? And I said, look, I just had Giovanna. So I just had my second baby. She was 3 months old. Andrew was 3 years old. And I said, I only have help 2 days a week. I'll give you as much time as I can to help you get an operation set up. So And then the role was for me to train someone they were going to bring for Texas to be director of White House personnel. If the president,
because it's a big job.
It's a big job. And so that's what I started to do, set up that operation, be ready to transition people in, getting ready to train this, woman to take on the job. And as things often happen in politics, somebody else wanted her for a different job in presidential personnel. So now there was no director of personnel. And Vicar says to me, well, can you do it? And I said, look, I'll do this for 4 months. I'll get some help with my kids. I'll do this for 4 months. But, a transition is so demanding. That transition was even more demanding because we had lost so much time. I was working till 1 and 2 o'clock in the morning and cobbling together nannies and babysitters during the day because Tim, of course, was working, but he handled all the nighttime duty. But I did it because, when you're asked to serve, you just do it and you figure it out. And I wanted to help. But those 4 months turned into 8 years. And we did eventually get someone else to be director of personnel. And they promoted me to Vicar's job. She was head of management administration. She left because her mother got sick and she had to move back to Texas to help her. And Andy Card again said, will you do this? And so I was in the White House, long story short, management administration. That's an operational unit. Now you're overseeing a lot. I mean, it's everything from parking to your passes to get in, to personnel, to sort of the budget for the White House. It's a big job.
And when you were there at probably the most traumatic moment in our certainly lifetimes.
That's right.
That's right. A moment when you were there that day and the days following, did you ever summon anything in your mind that your grandmother or your aunt or any of these women had taught you, or any of the other women that you had, the strength to stay? And
yes. No, that's a great question. I think, what I learned from my family, what I learned from my grandmother, what I learned from my aunts, what I learned from all these, women in my upbringing is strength and resilience, fortitude. Just do what you have to do. Life deals you curveballs all the time. And you respond to the need of the moment. I mean, I never, ever heard anybody, complain about a difficulty that, they were faced. They just got through it, and they got through it with each other. And I think 9/11 was one of those days. I mean, I was in the West Wing that morning having breakfast with a friend, Linda Gambitisa, who was head of Oval Office operations. The president was traveling to Florida. Mrs. Bush, we knew from the schedule, was going to be heading to Capitol Hill. All this chaos happens. We're directed by the Secret Service to get everybody out of their West Wing offices into the White House mess, thinking that was a safe place for them to be. That did not last very long, because then we were told to get everybody out, and, shouts of take off your shoes and run, and all the gates of the White House in every East Wing, West Wing, everywhere are open for people to run out. And I got everybody evacuated out of the mess, out of the West Wing. And I'm in Lafayette Park, and I'm looking all around. And I remember exiting with Mary Madeline, and she gets called back to the PIOC with the vice president. We're in Lafayette Park, and I look around and I see all these very senior people who had been, some of them had been new to the White House, had come in with the president. And I'm like, this is not right. These people, I don't know what it is. Okay, it's just instinctive. I think it was the training of having been at the White House, knowing enough about, operations, and just having an instinct to saying, I need to get these people somewhere else to keep working. And I made the one phone call that I could get out. We had flip phones then. We didn't have BlackBerries. We were already starting to investigate getting BlackBerries for senior staff, because we knew people on Capitol Hill had them, but we had not pulled the trigger on it. So we just had flip phones. And I got one call out to my husband, who was the number 2 of the Daimler Chrysler office, lobbying office in Washington. I said, we're at Lafayette Park, all these people, I know they shouldn't be here. Can I bring them to your office? I knew he would have the same instinct I did because Tim had worked in the White House too as the personal aide to Vice President Bush and President Bush, the father. He had been head of the military office, been an advanced person. He understood this too. He said, bring them here. And that's what we did. He sent all of his staff home. He told them all to turn on their computers, leave their passwords, because White House staff was going to come here. We had 72 people working out of that office that day. The Secret Service locked it down, 1401 H Street. And only people with a White House pass could come in and go. And that's where they worked until the president came home that night. So the instinct, I think, just in going back, what did I think about people in my life that helped? It's just the fortitude and move forward and don't collapse, basically. Just respond and help.
You didn't hear your grandmother complain?
No. I think, you know what? I think it's interesting you say that because I realized later, and both Tim and I realized later, we were now both together. Our kids were at home with a nanny. Nobody knew what still was up in the air or what could have happened in Washington. And what would have happened to our kids? I thought that's moments when I sort of thought about my mother, thought about my family, I can't second guess myself. Did I do the right thing? I did what I had to do at the moment. And, but we did realize, later, wow, we were both, neither one of us was with our own kids. We made sure they had gotten home. Andrew was in nursery school. The nanny went and got him. Gigi was a baby, so she was here. And my father was living here with us. Oh, and he's watching this on TV. And I will always remember him looking at those images and saying, "I never thought I'd see anything like this happen in America."
Right. And who had sacrificed so much and loved the country so much. And
yes.
That this could happen.
I think that this could happen.
I could talk to you forever, but
I know I'm getting off track. I'm probably not talking about enough women. You're making me talk about me, and but we're so close to the 25th anniversary, so it's very vivid.
And it's important that people remember.
And it's important that, Kate, young people now, I work at a university. I'm at AU. Not one student, freshman to senior, was born at times. So they don't know. And these are important lessons of resilience, the country's response, what people did, the humanity that came out of it, the unity in the country's darkest moment. And I think those are important lessons.
Very. I think we always think we're living through the hardest time, right? Everyone thinks that there have been hard times before. Is there anything you'd want to say about Laura Bush or Barbara Bush?
Sure.
I know you know.
Thank you. First of all, I want to say from Mrs. Reagan, I learned from her setting a standard of formality in the White House that, is still something I think about. Women, we didn't wear pants there in the White House then. We wore skirts and dresses and pantyhose, and that was sort of a standard, that she had. Not a bad thing. I learned how to work in an office. And
all the pantyhose are.
That's it. I'm done with those.
Yeah,
I'm
done with that.
Worn it again. That's a business. Don't invest in. But I did. Her presence was definitely felt. In the White House, no doubt about it. Barbara Bush, I'm always going to be grateful to her. She welcomed, my husband had been very close to both Bushes, of course, because he served in that very confidential role that was, with them morning, noon, and night. And, she welcomed me in to their family the way that she welcomed him into the family. And, there were times where Tim and I had difficulty having children. We married later and had many, many miscarriages. And the letters and notes that I got, from her of encouragement. And this is the period of time we were out of the White House. This is during the Clinton years. Of course, we were still seeing the Bushes. and just kind of the strength and guidance that she had given me. I will always remember that. And her
You were
being so,
close enough to them. Sorry to interrupt
that
you, but
she
you were
would
close
wrote.
enough to them that they knew about
Oh
this.
yeah, they knew. They
Oh,
knew when we got
interesting.
married. Of course, they wanted to come to the wedding, but it was the height of the campaign, and they weren't able to come. They were on travel. Tim took 2 days off for us to get married, but that was the first phone call we got after we left the church and got to the
Wow.
reception. The catering manager at the Four Seasons came over and said, "There's a phone call for you," and it was George and Barbara Bush. And she said to me, "Mrs. McBride, congratulations." And I said, "Oh my gosh, this is the first time I'm hearing my name said like that." And it's from the First Lady of the United States.
Wild.
So that, but in the years after, of course, they lost the election, as we know, but we stayed close, and Tim certainly did, and I was part of that. So they knew, yeah, of course, was
Yeah.
having our family, welcomed our kids warmly.
Mhm.
George Bush was the first to write letters to both of them when they were born. Didn't know what to make of Giovanna's name. He's like, "Do I call you G or Gia? Or maybe I'll call you Gigi, like our Gigi," which is Doro's daughter, and wrote in his letter to Andrew. When Andrew was born, he put a P.S. at the bottom and said, "I used to be president." No kidding. With an exclamation point.
Oh my
It was the
gosh.
cutest
Love
little
that.
letter. I mean, they were just
Love
beautiful
that.
people. So, I mean, I learned a lot about family, just watching,
Yeah.
them. But she was very, and
Yeah.
she was an amazing first lady. She really was just herself. And then Laura Bush, who I think I feel very strongly, Laura Bush was confident to hire me to
Mm.
be her chief of staff because she knew Tim. She knew Tim's role
Yes.
with the president, that confidential nature, always protected their interest, discretion. And I
Hmm.
think she felt I had the same.
Yeah.
Plus, I had worked in the White House, so I knew my way around. I'd been at the State Department too, and she wanted to do more globally. So all those things, from reading the mail to doing
Mm.
personnel, to having my
Wild.
stint in the State Department, and having that background of both, of Tim, having worked for the father and mother-in-law, and her getting to know them, and her getting to know him, that she felt comfortable, I think, to hire me. So I learned so much from her. Um, she was always the calm presence.
Mm.
She had the best judgment of anybody I've ever met.
Mm.
She always, she was a listener. Uh, just never turned up the heat politically. I think that was such an important.
I like that phrase.
Yes,
Or like
never.
never kind of made things harder than they had to be, right?
Absolutely. And I
Mhm.
do remember on 9/11 when the next day she or her staff, because we were all told we had to go back to work the next day. And then she had Kathy Card, the minister, who was a Methodist minister, Andy Card's wife, come to her office to meet with her staff, to kind of offer comfort and to,
Oh, wow.
yeah, it was
I
really
love it.
amazing. And I remember hearing that because I'm now, still back at my
Yeah.
job, and where we're having to change an entire pass system overnight. We're having to move people out of the old EOB 5 floors from ground to fifth floor, people who were on 17th Street side, because that was not secure now. And
Wow.
so all of that,
I didn't
was,
know that. I
oh
didn't
yeah,
know that Andy Card's wife came in and
and talk to the staff.
yes.
And I remember hearing that Mrs.
Mhm.
Bush did that. And I thought, oh, wouldn't that be so wonderful to work for someone like
Yeah.
that, who thinks that much
Yeah.
about, you know, her people, her staff, and had that kindness,
Yeah.
in her. Um,
And then you did.
so, and then I did. And then
Yeah.
I did. Although, Kate, you know what? I thought when I interviewed with Mrs. Bush, and her first words to me were, "I want to go to Afghanistan," thought this is a very different experience than I thought that it was going to be. But I understood it, why she wanted to do it. She had been so devoted to Afghan, women
Yeah.
and their
Yeah.
ability to be functioning members of their country and society. She would often say, it takes years and years and decades to build a nation. It just takes one moment to decimate it. And so she felt invested in them, and I understood why she wanted to do it.
Hmm.
And we made it happen. That was my first
Amazing.
charge as her chief of staff, went from January 20th when we started till March 30th, 2005. She was in Kabul.
That's really amazing to
Yeah.
get it that so fast. And you were talking, we did an event at the Library of Congress last
Yeah.
night about
Right.
First ladies, and you were talking about the scarf that
Yes.
she was that.
War.
Yeah, and that's going to be in the Smithsonian collection.
Well, they've
I'm not
asked
reading
for
it.
it. They've asked for it.
Cool.
It's been at a couple of different exhibits. It was actually at the George W. Bush Library and an exhibit on First Ladies and their work. And there was a section there on Mrs. Bush and global women's work and going to Afghanistan. The scarf was there. The National First Ladies Library had it too. The Smithsonian would like to have it. And of course, I want it to be somewhere where it's meaningful and it's seen and it evokes sort of a discussion about First ladies and their work and the courageous things that they do. It doesn't, matter that it was my scarf. It's just that it
Yes.
puts you in that moment.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yes, Elisa Kathleen Grady, our other
Yeah, she's
panelist,
great.
she's been after me for years to turn it over there. So,
Because I think we remember
yeah.
that she was I think the first lady to give a presidential radio address.
Yes, that's exactly right. That November of 2001, where she talked about Afghan women. That's
Which
exactly
was very
right.
bold,
Yeah,
I think,
and
at
it
the
was.
time.
It was. And it was bold for her to want to go. And my first question back to her when she asked me, when she said to me that's what she wanted to do in our interview, my first question to her was, does the president know? And she said yes, and he supports it. And that's all I needed to know, because I knew with that, then we would have every asset necessary to make it happen. And he was proud of her for sure.
I'm so glad that you have been willing to share your personal stories
Thank you,
and
Kate.
you really, I do think that your personal story of being the child of immigrants is really inspirational. And people hear you come from Connecticut, your last name's McBride, they probably assume, and you are, from
That's
Greenwich,
right.
but you are not. You are from like a, old small town. I know, because I'm from Connecticut too,
Yes.
but not a fancy part of Connecticut.
Yes.
And so you're from like a middle class.
Very,
family.
very, very much
And
so.
I think only in America, right?
Yes.
Could you get
You're right.
where?
You're right. No, thank you. I know I'm marrying the McBride sort of, people don't think, that I'm Italian, but it really takes people about 5 seconds once they meet me to know that I'm a very proud Italian American. I'm vice chair of the National Italian American Foundation. In fact, I went from the event with you last night to an event with the NIAF group here in Washington. And it's a very big part of my identity. My daughter's name is Giovanna. I had to get one in there with an Italian name. They know their Italian roots. We respect their Irish roots too for Tim. But yes, it is an amazing story. And I'm one of thousands and thousands that have this story. Millions. And I know it's only in America experience. And I hope we can, preserve that.
Well, thank you so much. And I'm indebted to you for taking so much time and also just for your work.
Well, thanks for doing something like this. Really, I appreciate it.
It's
a lot more comfortable. It is different, and I'm more comfortable about it now.
Okay, good.
Thank you.
All right. Well,
have a great weekend. Okay.
You too. Thanks so much. Bye.
Bye-bye.